big, shiny, gold-trimmed doors of Nusr-Et Steakhouse slid open with a sound of air rushing out, and the smell of cooked Wagyu beef and rosemary filled the air like a special perfume. Inside, there were flashes from people taking pictures with their phones, and the sound of crystal glasses clinking. Everything in the restaurant seemed to be about showing off and being fancy. It was like being rich and famous was the dress code, something everyone tried to do. Then, something unexpected happened. Keanu Reeves walked in. He didn't have an entourage, he didn't have a reservation, and he wasn't wearing anything fancy like everyone else. He was just wearing a plain black t-shirt, old jeans, and a hat pulled down low over his eyes. His boots still had some dust on them from the street outside. It was like he was from a different world, and this fancy restaurant didn't even know that world existed. When Keanu walked in, everyone turned their heads. Conversations stopped. A woman in a shiny dress looked at him, then scoffed and turned back to her champagne. A group of influencers sitting near the bar quickly pointed their phones at him, not to admire him, but to laugh at him. Keanu paused at the door for a second, waiting. The person in charge of seating people, a man called the maitre d', didn't look up. He was too busy handing menus to a couple wearing matching expensive watches. Keanu walked up to the maitre d' anyway, calmly. The maitre d' finally noticed him, but didn't seem impressed. "Are you lost?" he asked with a smile that was more about looking down on Keanu than helping him. Keanu met his eyes and said, "Just looking for dinner." The maitre d' smiled even more, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was a smile that showed he thought Keanu didn't belong in the restaurant. He tapped something on his iPad and waved toward the far side of the room, away from the fancy grill, away from the comfy velvet booths. It was a place near the bar, loud, crowded, and with blue light shining from bottles of vodka. "This way, sir," he said. Keanu followed him quietly. As he walked, people looked at him, not recognizing him, but mocking him. A young man in a fancy jacket whispered to his date, "Is that John Wick, or is he a DoorDash driver?" They both laughed. Keanu kept walking, not looking upset or bothered. He wasn't here to cause trouble, but he wasn't about to shrink away either. He was just looking for a meal. Keanu sat down at a table alone. He didn't have a menu yet, and there was no fancy show like some other people were getting with their food. There was just loud music and the sizzling sounds of steaks cooking. He looked around the restaurant, not judging, but just observing. He wasn't there to make a scene, but it seemed like the scene was making itself. The maitre d', Damien, was proud of his ability to tell who was important just by looking at them. The way someone dressed, the kind of watch they wore, how they held their glass, all these things told him who mattered and who didn't. Keanu, in his worn-out clothes and dusty boots, didn't seem to belong at all. He didn't fit in with the golden booths or the fancy restaurant. Damien walked over to Keanu's table with a smile that looked fake. "I'll be your server tonight," he said, putting a menu down in front of Keanu. The menu was smaller and thinner than the ones he gave to other customers. "We offer a special experience here at Nusr-Et for guests like you. We recommend our essential selection, a more approachable range of dishes," Damien said with a smile, still not hiding his sarcasm. Keanu looked at the menu, but it wasn't full of expensive steaks or fancy food like the others had. There were just burgers, salads, and one line that said, "Chef's Daily Special, Market Price." Keanu didn't say anything, not yet. Damien continued, his voice dripping with fake kindness. "If you're interested in our specialty cuts, we do require advance notice and a profile on file. You understand, it helps us keep the experience exclusive." Keanu finally looked up at Damien. His face was calm, like he wasn't upset, but he wasn't fooled by Damien's attitude either. "I see," Keanu said. Damien thought Keanu was giving in. He smiled, pleased with himself, and moved on to the wine list. But it wasn't really a wine list. It was a small laminated card with just 3 options: red, white, and sparkling. There were no names of wines, no countries where they came from, just prices. Damien said, "I'll give you a moment," then walked away, thinking he had avoided any trouble. Across the room, another server brought a big, golden tomahawk steak to a group of influencers. Damien smiled and even did a little pretend sprinkle of salt, making the group laugh and take pictures. But when he came back to Keanu's table, his smile started to fade. Keanu had put the small menu aside, and he was looking at Damien calmly. "I'd like the tomahawk gold," Keanu said. "Rare." Damien blinked, then laughed softly, thinking Keanu was joking. "Sir, that dish costs $1,500, and it's quite a show," Damien said. "Are you sure?" Keanu didn't flinch or change his face. "I am," he said simply. Damien hesitated. He had never seen anyone ask for the most expensive thing on the menu like that. It made him wonder if Keanu knew something he didn't. But instead of being impressed, Damien smiled even harder, trying to cover up his doubts. "Very well. I'll check with the kitchen, but it may not be available tonight," he said, then walked away quickly. Keanu didn't move. He just sat there, calmly, like he wasn't affected by what just happened. People around the restaurant started to notice the tension between Damien and Keanu. A couple of men in fancy velvet jackets whispered to each other, laughing about Keanu's clothes. One of them said, "Is he serious? Ordering a gold steak dressed like that?" Keanu didn't look bothered by their whispers. He just kept sitting quietly, waiting. When Damien came back, his jaw was tight. He looked like he was trying to hold his fake smile in place. "Sir, I've spoken in the kitchen. Unfortunately, the tomahawk gold is in limited supply tonight. Priority goes to guests with reservations and loyalty credentials." Keanu looked at Damien with the same calm, unreadable expression. "You mean it's not available to me?" he said. It wasn't a question, it was just a fact. Damien's smile twitched. "Of course not. I didn't say that," he replied, trying to cover up his mistake. "You didn't need to," Keanu said. Damien leaned in and spoke quietly, as if trying to warn Keanu. "I'm trying to save you the embarrassment. This isn't the kind of place where people just walk in." "You mean people who don't look the part?" Keanu asked. Damien leaned in even more, his voice getting sharper. "I mean people who can't pay the bill they're pretending to order." There was a long silence. It felt like everyone in the restaurant was listening to them. Then, Keanu did something unexpected. He smiled, just a small smile, like he knew exactly how the situation would end, and it wasn't going to end in Damien's favor. "You're sure the steak isn't available?" Keanu asked again, his voice calm but certain. "Positive," Damien snapped, a little too quickly. "Then maybe I'll just wait until it is," Keanu said, still calm, still relaxed. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't rude. It was just like Keanu knew something that Damien didn't. He wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. He was there to remind them that some people don't need to prove anything at all. Damien walked around the restaurant, trying to act like he was in charge. He smiled at the influencers, refilled champagne glasses, made jokes about fancy food, and even posed for selfies with a TikTok chef. But all the while, he kept an eye on Keanu. Keanu was still sitting at table 14, unmoved. He hadn't even touched the glass of water that had taken 10 minutes to arrive. His fingers gently tapped on the edge of the table, not because he was impatient, but because he was calm, like a clock ticking down to something important. Around him, people still whispered and pointed, but Keanu didn't care. He was there to eat. And he wasn't leaving until he got what he came for. Lucas looked over at the open kitchen. The real Salt Bae had not shown up yet. Customers whispered, waiting to see if he would come in and do his famous salt-flinging trick. Phones were ready to film it if the legendary chef made his entrance. Lucas rolled his eyes. He had done his part. The steak wasn't ready yet, and the man would eventually get the hint, pay for his water, and leave. But Keanu wasn't in a hurry. He stayed calm, not moving, like a rock in a river that refused to change. 20 minutes passed, and Lucas's patience started to disappear. He walked over to Keanu's table and dropped a small silver dish with a soft clink. "Complimentary bread," he said in a flat voice, not waiting for Keanu to thank him. He turned and walked away. Keanu looked at the bread. It was cold, didn't have butter, and seemed to have come from the back of the kitchen. He didn't say anything. At a nearby table, a middle-aged couple started whispering. "I think that's him," the woman said. "The actor." Her husband leaned closer and said, "The one from The Matrix?" The woman nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, that's him. I'm sure of it." They weren't the only ones who thought so. People around the restaurant began to talk quietly. A waiter who had been polishing glasses looked up. A hostess near the entrance squinted, noticing the man at the table. But Lucas didn't react. He didn't care. He walked back over to Keanu's table, this time with a big wine list, thick as a book and shiny with gold edges. "Maybe something to drink while you wait?" Lucas asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Keanu opened the wine list slowly, his eyes scanning the names of fancy wines. Opus 1, Chateau Margaux, Lafite Rothschild. He didn't look up but said, "What pairs well with disappointment?" Lucas froze for a moment, surprised. Then, he gave a short, hollow laugh. "You're full of surprises, sir," he said, his voice a little shaky. "You have no idea," Keanu replied calmly, closing the wine list. Just then, another waiter came up to Lucas, looking a little nervous. He whispered something in Lucas's ear. Lucas waved him off. "Handle it yourself," he said. The waiter hesitated and then said, "It's about table 14. Lucas turned sharply. "What about it?" The waiter glanced toward Keanu. A guest at table 6 recognized him. "They said he's Keanu Reeves." Lucas rolled his eyes. If he's really Keanu Reeves, why wouldn't he say so? The waiter didn't answer right away but gave Lucas a look, as if to say, "Maybe you're not the smartest person in the room anymore." But Lucas didn't care. Not yet. The worst kind of fire isn't the one that burns hot and fast. It's the one that starts quietly, without anyone noticing. It's the fire that slowly spreads, hidden at first, but it eventually destroys everything in its path. The tension in the air was starting to build, and it finally broke when Lucas scraped a chair back too loudly. He walked over to table 14, carrying a small silver dish in his hand with a bit too much flair, like he was putting on a show for everyone watching. He smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was sharp and fake. "Still waiting, sir?" he asked a bit too loudly, making sure people around the room could hear. Keanu looked up at him, calm as always, not bothered by the show of mockery. His quiet, steady gaze made the tension in the air feel even heavier. Lucas set the dish down with a big, exaggerated gesture and, as if in slow motion, pulled out a tiny golden packet of salt from his apron. He ripped it open, pinched the salt, and with an overly dramatic flick of his wrist, scattered the salt over the bread. Some grains fell on the table and even on Keanu's sleeve. Lucas did it exactly like Salt Bae, but where the real Salt Bae was graceful and cool, Lucas's movements were full of anger and spite. He was trying to show off, but it only made Keanu look even cooler by comparison. A ripple of laughter echoed from the table nearby. Someone took out a phone to film. A woman in a red dress whispered, "Guess you need a suit to be treated to the real salt around here." Her partner chuckled. Lucas grinned, playing along with the laughter. "You know, sir, some people come here just for the show," he said with a sneer. "But not everyone is cut out for gold." Keanu didn't react to the insult. He simply looked down at the spilled salt and calmly brushed it off his sleeve. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. His gaze met Lucas's with steady focus. "That's not how you salt a steak," Keanu said softly, but his words were clear. "Or a man." For a moment, the room was quiet. Everyone seemed to stop breathing. The tension in the air made Lucas's bravado falter just for a second. It was a small moment, but it was enough to shake him. But then the laughter came again, a little louder this time. People around the room couldn't help but laugh at the awkwardness of the moment. Keanu didn't seem bothered. He just picked up his water, took a sip, and set the glass down with a calm, measured motion. The whole scene made Lucas look smaller. The humiliation was clear for everyone to see, but Keanu wasn't interested in being part of it. From across the room, a customer who recognized Keanu pulled out their phone to take a secret photo. The news of what had just happened spread quickly through the restaurant. People were already posting about how Keanu Reeves had been disrespected at Salt Bay on social media. Lucas leaned in close to Keanu, speaking in a voice meant only for him. "Maybe next time, try somewhere less exclusive." Keanu's reply was almost a whisper, but it was clear. "Maybe next time, try respect." Lucas stood up straighter, trying to act like he had won, but his face showed that something was wrong. He was losing control of the situation, but he didn't know it yet. He walked away, trying to keep up his fake confidence, but Keanu didn't watch him leave. He stayed in his seat, calm and composed, as if he knew something the others didn't. He wasn't interested in fighting back. Not yet. Because sometimes, life has a way of handling things on its own. And in the air, the smell of rosemary burning drifted through the restaurant. But no one seemed to notice. What had started as a small act of disrespect had turned into something much bigger. The diners at Nusr-Et weren't laughing anymore. They were all staring at table 14, watching Keanu, who still sat alone. His body was relaxed, but his presence felt stronger now. It was like a fuse had been lit, but it hadn't reached the explosion yet. People kept glancing over at him, wondering if it was really him. He hadn't reacted to the salt throwing, and he hadn't flinched when they made fun of him. The room had become still and heavy, and all eyes were on him. Meanwhile, Lucas was still trying to act like he owned the place. He smiled at a few loyal regulars who were still laughing with him, but even they didn't seem as sure as before. The laughter was thinner, and the jokes didn't sound as funny as they had when they first started. Lucas stopped near the bar and exchanged a smug look with the manager, a young man who looked like he had studied Salt Bay's every move. The manager had seen everything that happened, but he hadn't done anything. "Salt Bay's here?" the manager asked, his voice uncertain. Lucas smirked. "He'll leave. Guys like that always do. Embarrassment hits later." "We'll keep his table warm for the next Instagram prints," the manager said, but his voice didn't sound so confident anymore. Behind them, an older man, sharp-eyed and sitting alone near the kitchen, put his fork down. He turned to the waitress and whispered, "That's Keanu Reeves. Your staff is making fools of themselves." The waitress nodded, looking worried, but trying not to show it. Even the kitchen staff had noticed. Line cooks exchanged quick glances, lips pressed tight. One of them mumbled, "That's John Wick," and Lucas just threw salt at him. Through it all, Keanu stayed still. His hands were resting on the table, his fingers interlaced, and his eyes slowly scanned the room. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He was aware of everything happening around him. Every look, every laugh, every silent moment. He wasn't looking for pity. He was just watching. Then, as if the whole restaurant was holding its breath, the sound of the kitchen door opening echoed loudly. It was a sharp sound, like a bell ringing in the quiet room. Everyone turned toward the door. The kitchen door creaked open slowly, and through the doorway, the unmistakable figure of Salt Bay stepped into the room. His presence was so strong that the room seemed to quiet even more. He was wearing his usual chef's outfit, white and pristine, with dark glasses resting on his nose. His black gloves were tight around his hands, and a shiny gold watch gleamed on his wrist. In one hand, he held a long chef's knife. In the other, a sizzling gold-plated tomahawk steak, glistening with juices, sat on a wooden board. Phones lifted all around the room, but Salt Bae didn't glance at anyone. He didn't nod at the manager, who now stood frozen by the bar. He didn't even look at Lucas, who had gone stiff as a stone, his earlier confidence completely gone. Salt Bae moved slowly through the room, and for the first time all night, Lucas's smirk faded. He didn't know what to do. The manager straightened up, and the entire room watched as Salt Bae walked past them, completely ignoring the scene Lucas had tried to create. Keanu watched the whole thing quietly. As Salt Bae's eyes met Keanu's, Keanu allowed himself a small, barely noticeable smile. The stage had been set, and the performance wasn't over yet. Salt Bae walked straight to table 14, where Keanu Reeves was sitting. The moment felt like a scene from a movie. One man was famous for playing tough characters, and the other was famous for being very stylish. Now, they were meeting in a restaurant filled with steak knives and a lot of pride. Salt Bae stopped beside the table, took off his sunglasses, and smiled. The crowd held their breath. Then, he smiled warmly, breaking the tension like sunlight breaking through smoke. "My brother," Salt Bae said with a deep voice and a friendly accent. Keanu stood up. The two of them hugged each other like old friends, not with a big show, but like they were comfortable with each other. "You didn't tell me you were coming," Salt Bae said. "I didn't plan to stay long," Keanu replied, his voice dry. "But someone made the evening interesting." Salt Bae turned around slowly, his eyes landing on Damien, who had been making fun of Keanu. The room went silent. Damien turned pale, nervous. He stepped forward, holding up his hands, trying to explain. "I didn't know you through Salt," Damien said. But Salt Bae interrupted him, his voice turning cold. "You humiliated one of the most respected men alive in my house," he said. Damien was confused. "It was just a joke," he said quickly. "I didn't know who he was." Salt Bae raised his hand, and Damien stopped talking. Salt Bae turned to the restaurant manager. "You let this happen?" he asked. The manager opened his mouth but didn't say anything. Salt Bae didn't wait. He snapped his fingers, and a senior server appeared right away. "Pull the kitchen feed," Salt Bae ordered. "Show it to everyone now." Within seconds, all the TVs in the restaurant, which were usually used for showing fancy food, began playing security footage. The whole sequence played out. Damien had sprinkled salt on Keanu's sleeve, and people around them had laughed. Salt Bae's voice was cold as ice. "You humiliated one of the most respected men alive in my house," he said again. Then he turned to Damien. "You don't work here anymore." Two security staff quietly walked from the bar, and Damien stepped back, looking even more nervous. "Please, I didn't mean to." He started. "Go," Salt Bae said firmly, not waiting for Damien to explain. "Before you leave and make this worse." As Damien was escorted out, the crowd stayed completely silent, because now everyone understood. Respect wasn't about how famous someone was. It was about knowing who you were talking to before it was too late. The doors slammed behind Damien. A quiet murmur spread through the restaurant, like a change in the air. People who had laughed and filmed Keanu earlier now started with wide eyes. They slowly put down their phones as they understood what had just happened. Salt Bae stood next to Keanu's table, adjusting his sleeves calmly. The gold tomahawk steak was still there, looking rich and smelling delicious. "Forgive my staff," Salt Bae said, nodding slightly. "Sometimes people confuse uniforms for power." Keanu simply nodded slightly in return, bowing his head a little. "It's easy to forget that service is about dignity, not showing off," he said quietly. Without saying anything more, Salt Bae lifted the knife and began slicing the steak with skill and care. Every slice was smooth and perfect, the meat tender and juicy under the warm lights. The people at the surrounding tables watched in complete silence. They were no longer laughing or amused. They were now full of respect. Salt Bae plated the first slice and gently placed it in front of Keanu. "For those who walk in without needing to prove anything," Salt Bae said. Keanu smiled just a little. "And for those who listen before judging." Across the room, the manager stood still, his face pale and covered in sweat. Salt Bae gave him one quick look. The manager didn't say anything. He turned and quickly disappeared into the back, his future uncertain. The security footage was still playing on the TVs, but no one was laughing anymore. Now, everyone watched quietly, looking at their own reflections in the screens. They could see how quickly they had judged Keanu, how eager they had been to join in. They noticed how loud their silence had been when they should have spoken up. Keanu picked up his fork and took a small bite of the steak. The room was completely silent for a moment. Then, slowly, people began clapping. It wasn't loud or forced. It started from one table, then spread to another, and then another. It was a quiet applause for Keanu, showing respect for how he handled the situation. Keanu didn't try to stop them or wave. He didn't need to. He was focused on the steak in front of him, and the evening that was meant to embarrass him had turned into something else. It had become a reminder that in a world obsessed with looking good, real value comes last, but it's still the most important. The applause slowly faded into a warm and respectful silence. For the first time that night, the restaurant didn't feel like a stage for people to show off. It felt like a place where something real was happening. Keanu sat peacefully at table 14, eating the steak Salt Bae had prepared for him. No phones were in his face anymore, no whispers behind his back. There was only silence and respect, earned without asking for it. Salt Bae stayed nearby, not hovering, just present. There was no show, no salt sprinkle, and no big performance. It was just a man recognizing another, not for their fame, but for their calm strength. When Keanu finished the last bite of steak, he leaned back and picked up the glass of wine that had quietly appeared in front of him. It was a deep red wine, not for show, but as a small apology. He raised it towards Salt Bae and said, "Thank you for seeing what others didn't." Salt Bae gave a simple nod. Respect is the rarest ingredient, but once added, it changes everything. A few moments later, Keanu stood up, adjusting his worn cap. There were no photos, no goodbyes. He walked past the tables, through the velvet ropes, his presence quietly noticed by the people who now saw him for who he really was. Keanu stepped out through the same doors he had entered hours ago. The world outside didn't look any different, but the people inside had changed. In a world where appearances matter so much, it's easy to forget that real worth doesn't come with a price tag, and respect shouldn't need to be recognized. Keanu didn't ask for status. He didn't fight to be seen. Instead, he let his character speak, and it spoke louder than any gold-covered steak ever could. If you liked this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures, mysteries, and unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.